Brass bands in Beijing make way for sticker shock at home as Trump returns to escalating inflation. Add AP News as your preferred source to see more of our stories on Google. Add AP News on Google. Add AP News as your preferred source to see more of our stories on Google. Share Washington at President Donald Trump returned from the spectacle of a Chinese state visit to a less than welcoming U.S. economy, with the military band and garden tour in Beijing giving way to pressure over how to fix America's escalating inflation rate. Consumer inflation in the United States increased to 3.8% annually in April, higher than what he inherited as the Iran war, and the Republican president's own tariffs have pushed up prices. Inflation is now outpacing wage gains and effectively making workers poorer. The Cleveland Federal Reserve estimates that annual inflation could reach 4.2% in May as the war has kept oil and gasoline prices high. Trump's time with Chinese leader Xi Jinping appears unlikely to help the U.S. economy much, despite Trump's claims of coming trade deals. The trip occurred as many people are voting in primaries leading into the November general election, while having to absorb the rising costs of gasoline, groceries, utility bills, jewelry, women's clothing, airplane tickets, and delivery services. Democrats see the moment as a political opportunity. "He's returning to a dumpster fire," said Lindsay Owens, executive director of Groundwork Collaborative, a liberal think tank focused on economic issues. "The president will not have the faith and confidence of the American people. The economy is their top issue, and the president is saying, 'You're on your own.'" The president's trip to Beijing and his recent comments that indicated a tone deafness to voters' concerns about rising prices have suggested his focus is not on the American public and have undermined Republicans who had intended to campaign on last year's tax cuts as helping families. Read more. Trump described the trip as a victory, saying on social media that Xi congratulated me on so many tremendous successes, as the U.S. president has praised their relationship. Trump told reporters that Boeing would be selling 200 aircraft, and maybe even 750 if they do a good job, to the Chinese. He said American farmers would be very happy because China would be buying billions of dollars of soybeans. "We had an amazing time," Trump said as he flew home on Air Force One, and told Fox News' Bret Baier in an interview that gasoline prices were just some short-term pain and would drop like a rock once the war ends. Inflationary pain is not a factor in how Trump handles Iran. Trump departed from the White House for China by saying the negotiations over the Iran war depended on stopping Tehran from developing nuclear weapons. "I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon," Trump said. That remark prompted blowback because it suggested to some that Trump cared more about challenging Iran and fighting inflation at home. Trump defended his words, telling Fox News, "That's a perfect statement. I'd make it again." The White House has since stressed that Trump is focused on inflation. Asked later about the president's words, Vice President J.D. Vance said there had been a misrepresentation of the remarks. White House spokesman Kush Desai said the administration remains laser-focused on delivering growth and affordability on the home front, while indicating actions would be taken on grocery prices. But as Trump appeared alongside Xi, new reports back home showed inflation rising for businesses and interest rates climbing on U.S. government debt. His comments that Boeing would sell 200 jets to China caused the company's stock price to fall because investors had expected a larger number. There was little concrete information offered about any trade agreements reached during the summit, including Chinese purchases of U.S. exports such as liquefied natural gas and beef. Foreign policy wins can matter politically, but only if voters feel stability and affordability in their daily lives, said Brittany Martinez, a former Republican congressional aide who is the executive director of Principles First, a center-right advocacy group focused on democracy issues. Midterms are almost always a referendum on cost of living and public frustration, and Republicans are not immune from the same inflation and affordability pressures that hurt Democrats in recent cycles, she added. Democrats see Trump as vulnerable. Democratic lawmakers are seizing on Trump's comments before his trip as proof of his indifference to lowering costs. There is potential staying power of his remarks as Americans head into Memorial Day, weekend facing rising prices for the hamburgers and hot dogs to be grilled. What Americans do not see is any sympathy, any support, or any plan from Trump and congressional Republicans to lower costs. In fact, they see the opposite, Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer of New York said Thursday. Vance faulted the Biden administration for the inflation problem, even though the inflation rate is now higher than it was when Trump returned to the White House in January 2025 with a specific mandate to fix it. The inflation number last month was not great, Vance said Wednesday, but he then stressed, "We're not seeing anything like what we saw under the Biden administration." Inflation peaked at 9.1% in June 2022 under Biden, a Democrat. By the time Trump took the oath of office, it was a far more modest 3%. Trump's inflation challenge could get harder. The data tells a different story, as higher inflation is spreading into the cost of servicing the national debt. Over the past week, the interest rate charged on 10-year U.S. government debt jumped from 4.36% to 4.6%, an increase that implies higher costs for auto loans and mortgages. My fear is that the layers of supply shocks that are affecting the U.S. economy will only further feed into inflationary pressures, said Gregory Darko, chief economist at EY Parthenon. Darko noted that last year's tariff increases were now translating into higher clothing prices, with the Supreme Court ruling against Trump's ability to impose tariffs by declaring an economic emergency. His administration is preparing a new set of import taxes for this summer. Darko stressed that there have been a series of supply shocks. First, tariffs cut into the supply of imports. In addition, Trump's immigration crackdown cut into the supply of foreign-born workers. Now, the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz has cut off the vital waterway used to ship 20% of global oil supplies. We are seeing an erosion of growth, Darko said.